A very good morning to one and all present here. I, Payal Vartak, Student Manager, Balaji Institute of International Business, feels immense pleasure in introducing amongst you all Mr. Hari Thallapale Sir, Chief Executive Officer, Call Health. Sir has had over 20 years of experience in the corporate sector after completing his education from Loyola College. He started his career as a head human resources at DSQ Software. Sir has also served as a global head human resources in Satyam Computer Services Limited, where he led the technology and business advisory factors. Sir had also been associated with Tech Mahindra, where he served as a Chief Marketing Officer and Global Head Business Consulting. Sir, we are delighted to have you here amongst us. I would like to request you to please come and enlighten us with the words of wisdom. Sir, the dais is all yours.
Just put it on black for now. Thank you. It would be good to have, actually. Otherwise, I'm okay. Sorry? No, that's okay. I'll use it. Good morning. When I see all of you sitting out there, so well disciplined, extremely well dressed, I have to say, I kind of tell myself I wish I was sitting on the other side. Yeah. No, I seriously won't fit in. I know I'm outside by at least 2 generations, I think, compared to you. She was very kind. I did tell her to reduce my age, but I didn't realize she'll reduce my age by 10 years. So I actually worked for 30 years. And that's also my age, so it's kind of thereabouts. I was listening to this very intense session from Ash, and I thought that was very, very, very powerful. And I'm feeling that many of you here, sitting here today, are truly blessed to be able to listen to sessions like that, because I don't think in normal life, in colleges, one will ever get to know the inner details of an organization or the complexities of the marketplace. And it was extremely interesting for me, at least, sitting out there to listen to that particular session. So since that was very intense, I thought I'll make mine a little bit less intense for you and talk about my own life across how many jobs now? The 4 jobs and over 30 years and across 5 different functions. So in many ways, what you will hear today from me is more about a life of experimentation and how I believe that most of you will be tested as you go along. And I'm hoping that some of the points that I leave behind with you today would probably be useful for you as you go on with your career. The first and foremost point is for me to tell you that there is nothing like a discipline or a specialization in my mind. I know all of you will now take pride in the fact that some of you are studying for marketing, some of you are studying for operations, some of you are, I'm sure, studying for HR and so on. The good news is it's useful. The bad news is not for too long. So if you walk into this marketplace or into the corporate world thinking that what you have done now is what you're going to do for a lifetime, I feel you're going to be very, very short-sighted in your approach. So let me take you through a very distinct and a very different approach to life. When I look at my life over the last 30 years, when I was trying to make my living like many of you today are getting to, I thought I will get into a job, I will stay in that job and retire in that job. Right? Many of us make those great promises to ourselves saying that whichever company you join, you're going to stay there for a long time. And more importantly, whichever function you take, you will play that for long. So just like everybody else, I walked into this role as a management trainee, started my life, at least these days you guys have computers to play around with. When I started my career, frankly, if the whole organization had one PC, you were like really blessed. And so when we started, I did, like everybody else, and those of you who are doing HR now will know, I learned about organizational behavior, IR, trade unions, labor laws, God knows what not. And when I went to work, all I can tell you is that they gave me box files. I don't even think any of you have seen a box file in today's world. The box files are there. Have some of you have seen? I'm impressed. Okay. So these were those big ones with resumes tagged up and given to me saying, can you sit down and create an index? So here I am being paid very well, I can tell you, for a career when I started my life. And I've been given this box file to sit down and make a summary of each resume of each candidate. And I was supposed to help in a hiring process. So I spent about 3 months of my initial career learning how to do the basics of shortlisting a resume. And shortlisting a resume, which was a hard copy, not a soft copy. So not like Talio today where you can start summarizing at a very different level. And I was very proud of the fact that I was doing it, because you were actually looking at the resumes of some of those really established guys in the market, and I was feeling very powerful that I could decide whether they will sit for an interview or not. And you know how it is when you're fresh, you're looking at everybody's resume and you're feeling very thrilled about your own life. And then within about 2 months of joining, I was asked to accompany my leader, my boss, to one of the campus interviews. So just to give you a context, when I went to college, my math score was something like 45 or something out of 100. And I have a feeling that the guy who corrected my paper must have said, give it to him, at least let him get through this year. I don't think he had any idea what I had written and what he had certified at that time. So the first place I went for a campus interview was a place called IIT Kharagpur. Right? Some of you have heard of that place, right? So IIT Kharagpur, and I'm standing there. You know, those days you have to call your parents on from a landline. So I'm calling my parents and telling them, you know what, I'm going to IIT Kharagpur for a campus interview. And my parents were very keen that I study in one of those places. I said, I didn't somehow manage to get you that privilege, but I can tell you that I'm going there to select students from there. You know, some consolation in life. Now, what I did is something that I want to tell you. And the reason I'm telling you that is because when you go along in life, you'll realize that a lot of things that you're expected to do in the first few years in your life will not be glamorous, will not be exciting, will not pull out the best out of you. So when I went those days, you had to do, these days you know how it is, you come in and push this flash drive into your server and we give you the test where you sit down and do on your computers. At least most of the engineering colleges today do that. Those days when we were to go, we had to walk in with test booklets. And those test booklets were pretty heavy. And I was given the job, frankly, the courier boy I was, to IIT Kharagpur, carrying these lots of test booklets and going in and distributing it for people to write the test, collecting it, putting a stencil and evaluating it. So a year or two in my life went around doing things which I would look back with great amount of pride and say was a lot of manual labor, definitely exposure to the world, but nothing that I could write home about or talk about. Eventually, as I moved along in life, I realized that the fact that you can do those kinds of things gives you a stability and an opportunity to do more. And one other example before I go on to this little presentation that I want to do to you. I worked with a boss who was, in some sense, called the black hole. You know the black hole? Things go in there and never come back, right? So his office was called the black hole because any paper, those days we only had papers moving between offices. Anything that goes into his office would never come out. And there was a lot of effort and a lot of pressure on me as one of the management trainees who was responsive to help finish things that were started and some were waiting otherwise. So I did a lot of work for my boss in terms of writing the responses, writing the policies, and I often went through this very irritating feeling that what kind of a boss do I have that I have to do all his work. That was my level of frustration that I dealt with. And that went on for about 4 or 5 years when almost anything that was going out of his office would essentially be drafted, corrected, rewritten 15 times before it goes out, but I did that work. The reason I say that is, when I was doing the work, which was my boss's work really in some sense, I was irritated saying, why am I doing his work and why is he not doing his work? And a lot of people around me used to say, if Hari has cleared it, then it's quite possible that his boss will clear it. Now, the good news was that 5 years later, when he quit and he moved on, the organization decided that they shouldn't be hiring somebody else and that maybe anyway the guy has been doing all the work, let him continue to hold the interim head of HR role. So 6 years of working into my life, I was running HR for a 500 people company, which was at that point of time the pioneer in CAD/CAM services in India. This will have a relevance to the rest of the conversation that I'm going to have with you. And I'd like to apologize for using a deck which I had kind of, prepared about 4 months back in the context of an NHRD presentation. And I believe that the essence is still true, but I couldn't get to change it when I was sitting there trying to download. So you'll have to bear with me as I show you a PPT that is not necessarily the latest in terms of the company that I work for. You'll have to go into a full screen mode. Okay. So what I'm going to talk to you about, in essence, is about my journey from being in the people business to becoming a business leader in my own little way, somewhere. Now, the reason I talked about some of the work that I did as I started my career is because today when I work with a lot of trainees, a lot of people who come into my life, and Prof. Bala knows that I've been hiring from wherever he has been since almost like 90s. I've been hiring hiring his students. I have seen a lot of people who come in with stars in their eyes with expectations that they will change the world on day one. And sometimes the level of frustration that lands up within 3-4 months or sometimes 1 year of wherever they are leads them to kind of go a little awry in terms of their career. So the conversation is about what I believe you will need to bring into play. See, at the end of the day, my belief in life is that your success is a function of two critical things: the core and the context. And what I mean by the core and context is, at any point of time, in any job that you have, the two things that are going to determine whether you will succeed are the skills that are required to do the job that has been given to you and the attitude that you bring, the personality that you have, the willingness to experiment that you bring in as a person. Now, what I mean by that in terms of the skill is, take your experience today of being in sales and marketing. Some of them yesterday I talked about wanting to be in sales and marketing because it gives me an opportunity to connect to people and gives me an opportunity to sell an idea or a concept. My message to you is that irrespective of the job or the specialization that you do, that's a skill that you need to bring every day. Whether you are in HR, whether you are in finance, whether you are in marketing, the sales and marketing is an integral part of what you do. Whether you are in sales and marketing or in operations, the human resources skill is a mandatory skill that you need to bring into play. Now, the message here to you, all of you, is that if you see your specialization as your end, I think that's the beginning of the end. Your specialization is just an introduction to an area where you get a passport or a visa to enter. And nothing else matters after that. After that, what matters is your ability to say the most impossible task in front of you is doable. So over time, we realize that the core that people bring to play is their attitude to say that I am willing to try whatever is given to me, and the skill to learn and apply whatever has been given to them. So in a typical organizational situation, if you think that they go for experience, that's a fundamental flaw. What they are looking for is the spirit of experimentation. Sometimes in organizations and in institutions, you think learning is important. And my message is that unlearning is more important than learning. Because when you say you have done it once, what you are bringing is the baggage of saying, I know how it is done. But what you did could have been a year ago, 6 months ago, and things would be different today. What you learned could be with a boss who was of a different type. Your boss today could be of a very different type. So the core is your ability to learn what is in front of you and the attitude to say, I will get it done irrespective of the complexity there. The context is, in many instances, and this is important to recognize, that the organization you work for could be a startup or could be a very established organization like Deutsche Bank. Years of existence, procedures, sometimes I would even say protocols that are so rigid that you will have to operate in a certain way. So the evolution of the organization is a context that you have to keep in mind. It is very difficult sometimes to walk into a very large organization and say, I will operate in a startup environment. So do you recognize your organization and the chemistry of that organization as you apply yourself becomes very critical. The second point is, of course, today, every day is a new day. Everything is volatile, everything is uncertain, everything is complex. So if you're sitting in an environment which is truly convoluted around you, your regulatory frameworks are changing. I don't know how many of you noticed, what are the big reforms that were announced just about less than 3 weeks back? What was the big, any of you in the room here can comment? What were some of the big reforms that were announced? The government announced some big reforms. Anybody remember? Okay, so Economic Times is not on your table. I thought Prof. Bala made all of you read the paper in the morning. So what was the big set of reforms? They called it, after 1991, the next big set of reforms.
Liberalization.
I'm sorry?
Liberalization, privatization, and globalization.
That was 1991, right? And what happened now?
Digital India.
So they talked about FDIs, right? You remember all those changes that they brought in. You know, it happened overnight with almost no great prelude to that announcement. What it means is that some organizations that have traditionally operated here thinking they are in a safe ground, overnight are potentially being threatened by new players that would come in. Till recently, the defense establishments used to say that we would buy only if 30% of the work that you do is going to be procured from India, the offset, as they called it. They brought in flexibility on the offset of business. What it means is that your competitive scenario, your competition can change just overnight. And what it does is that you turn around and you look at and say, oh my God, I thought I was safe and I was planning for the next 3 years, but now looks like I'll have to plan for the next 3 months. I'll have to make some changes before the other guys come in the next 3 to 6 months. So your context that you're living in is very uncertain, is very volatile, and is constantly going to throw a challenge at you. And it is not only for an organization, it's also for you as an individual. You may be the most well-appreciated blue-eyed boy in the system in a team of 10 people. And all it takes is 2 or 3 new laterals to come in or 2 or 3 new management trainees to come in who appear to be much brighter than you around. And suddenly your position is under threat. And the only thing that can keep you survive through this whole thing is your attitude to say, good, I'm only at half time in the game. The next half time of the game, I'll play harder and better. So the message to you is that your core is what you need to build on. And that core that you're talking about is whichever area you're working on, do you have the latest knowledge? Have you understood what competition is doing? Have you been able to show that you can do things in a differentiated way compared to the other colleagues around you? And that brings forth a greater attraction to have people in the team. Otherwise, you would get left behind in the race. So, context is something that you should be aware of. Don't get overly burdened by it, but focus on your ability to constantly keep yourself upgraded. So that's one message I wanted to say. So I would say success, in my mind, is a combination of your ability to be aware of the core and the context on an ongoing, continual basis. Just because you graduated from the Balaji Institute, or as you go along in life, maybe 1 year from Harvard, nothing, I repeat, nothing will help you if you don't apply yourself. In my career of whatever I have done in the human capital side, I have had the very unpleasant job of having to terminate guys from IIMs, guys from IXths, guys from some of the most premium institutes. And you would think, how could that happen? And it happens only because somebody is so caught up in the pedigree that they come from that they lose sight of what the market needs today and is not current to be able to survive. So the message to you is be constantly aware of where you're going and learn from what is around you. The next other important point is many of us get carried away by what I call as our focus on one thing. And that is sometimes a challenge. And what I mean by that is you could be extremely good at dealing with your customer. Maybe your customers that you service as part of you're working for a telco, you're managing a region, you're damn good in terms of your CSAT or your NPS as we call it, and you have great kudos on that dimension. But if you're not capable of managing the investor dimension, which is the profitability and so on, or if you're not capable of bringing forth the team around you equally effectively, you will notice there are great leaders that have been left by the wayside. And I'll give you another experience as to when I changed from my role. See, after about 20 years of working in human capital management, we went through, I would say, very interesting experiments on the HR side. In 1999, I had joined this organization, and in 2001, we applied for the Best Employer Survey. And we had managed to get what I would call as the 13th position from one organization called Hewitt and the 14th position from another organization called Mercer. They used to do the Best Employer Surveys. We took a call saying, beyond 10 is not a good score, so we need to work. So we worked hard, we pushed ourselves, went back for a re-entry in 2004. In 2004, we were ranked 7th by Mercer and 8th by Hewitt in the ranking of the top 10. We went hard at it again. We were obviously certain that we could get better. So we worked on it. Great team, we worked on it. In 2007, we went for the test again. And it was again a very intense thing. We were rated number 2 in Hewitt and number 3 in Mercer. Now, this is across sectors, across the whole country. Now, when I was at that peak, when the market recognized and IT sector was growing dramatically those days, when I was at the peak of HR success and you were getting recognized and celebrated everywhere, I asked myself, what would I do with my life? Would I want to retire in HR or do something else? So I took the call that I needed to do something else, otherwise my strength will become my weakness. Because when I went and spoke to my boss saying something else, the first question was, what will happen to HR? But we will get into trouble. you can't move from where you are. The only thing that saved me was during my entire HR career, I was one of the primary faces that would interact with the customers who are visiting and make presentations to them about our people practices. And we were always appreciated, celebrated, and we were always welcome into the customer dinners and so on. And so when I asked for a change of job and I said I want to do marketing, the first question was, why? I said, because that is an outside-in job compared to HR, which is a very inside-out job, and I want to do something dramatically different. And the reason I got selected for that role was because all through my life in HR, I was making more customer presentations than sometimes the salespeople. And so the message here is that I was sitting in a job which was focused on associates or the employees of the company, but I was doing a job that was connecting to another stakeholder, which is the customer. And therefore, the message to some of you is that as you get into your careers, don't get closeted into one area. It's very, very possible, and you often make that mistake of saying, I'll continue in this line because I'm very good at it. I'm saying yes, but keep a holistic view of how your other stakeholders are getting impacted or getting benefited. That play is very, very critical to do. And through my career, and including some of the people I've hired from the Balaji Institute, I have seen people who come in for a given role and transition to other roles. And the only thing that makes you or gives you the confidence to transfer them out is because they show the spirit of learning and adapting to the new challenges. The last point on this is, irrespective of which role you do, your scorecard will have to focus on all those 4 parameters. I'm sorry you're not able to see that very clearly out there, but your scorecard at the end of the day will have to focus on financial parameters. And we'll have a discussion during the Q&A on that, but even in an HR job, you have to understand financial parameters are as paramount as your attrition data or your, what you would call as your delight index score that you may have. So remember that your ability to balance or straddle all the parameters of financial, of how people or customers are satisfied, how your officers are satisfied, how you are capable of writing processes where somebody else is able to do the job that you were doing easily. The day you become the only person who can do a job and so nobody else can do that job, that is probably the beginning of your downfall. It will give you temporary success, but it will give you a permanent failure. So the ability to bring the team around you into jobs that can where you can make them repeatable is a very critical dimension. So looking at processes, stating them down, creating an opportunity for the organization to do those things without mistakes, irrespective of who's doing it, makes you a success in the long run. And lastly, the one thing that most of us do is that when you get out of the campus, you tell yourself that your time for studies is over. It's now time to apply. And my only humble representation to all of you is that your time to study actually begins when you get out of here. Those exams that you write, those papers that you pass, would give you only 30% of an advantage in real life. Your true learning is your ability to constantly acquire knowledge through structured programs or through interactions with successful people in and around you. So focus on yourself. A lot of you stop doing that in your pursuit of success. And then at some point you say, but where is the time? The point is, if you don't have time for yourself, nobody else will have time for you. And so with that, I just want to pause there. I know this is a generic conversation. I'm not here to talk about the way the industry is going. If you look at my life, I've moved from technology services, from hardcore R&D to technology services. Now I'm sitting in an organization running the healthcare services. And all these are different environments, which means different learning, and the learning is not top-down, learning is bottom-up also. You're meeting. Thank you so much.